Yeah.
It's going to start now. No, I'm going to tell you, Raph. It's going to start now.
But it doesn't have to start now.
But like when you edit, it's going to be me saying, and we're starting now. This isn't my podcast, it's yours.
But that's when it's going to start.
That's
now.
It should be your podcast.
No.
What's in the koozie? Is that a beer or is that a Coke?
This is a beer. This is Jenny, dude.
Genesee.
Oh, Genesee. I haven't had the. That's like strictly an upstate New York beer, right?
Rochester made.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they don't have it at the Wegmans in the city. Maybe, I don't know.
I'm not a big beer guy anymore, or I don't know if I ever.
Not
was
into the
hips.
Never.
Not into the hips.
No more.
No, but we're.
That's a joke that like 3 people will get.
I know.
What about Desperados? What about Desperados?
I'm like, no, you're not a beer guy, but I bet this guy's into Desperados. He seems like a tequila flavored beer kind of guy.
Oh no, not at all. I don't drink tequila. I never told you guys that I don't drink tequila.
No.
Okay, that's a story for off air.
Okay,
but there is a story there for.
That's too personal. Why you don't drink tequila? That's too personal for that.
It's way too personal. Yeah, it's a very deep cut. But I haven't had tequila in like 12 years.
Damn.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow. Since you were 12. I keep thinking like we're all 24, and it's like, dude, no. I'm closer to my AARP card than I am my high school graduation.
That's not true at all.
My hips say
not
yes.
True at all. My knees definitely say yes.
Oh yeah, so bad,
so bad. Well, Street Agers, we've got a very special episode for you today. I'm joined by 2 of my good friends, 2 of my old friends, 2 college buddies, 2 buddies who I had the pleasure of meeting while studying abroad in London. Matt, Simon, welcome into the Canon. It's an absolute pleasure having you guys on. We're talking about Night of the Living Dead today, but before we get into Night of the Living Dead, we have some more catching up to do. I feel like it's been a while, and I miss you guys. How are y'all doing?
Dude, we've missed you. It's always a good time to catch up and chat, man.
Yeah. There's nothing more 2023 than a guy being like, hey, I haven't talked to my buddies in a while. How about I invite them onto my podcast?
Of course, yes. Like you say yes.
I don't think anyone's ever invited me on a podcast before. This is my first time. I don't know. I don't know much about podcasts. Yeah.
It's just you just talk. It's just talking, which is like
apparently I'm learning that right now. Actually,
yeah. Honestly, I'm not even good at talking, and I was like, you know what? I should try this whole podcasting thing out.
You do such a good job, though, because the episodes that I've listened to in preparation for this, you've really nailed down the candor, the delivery, and in terms of like subject change, you really are a very good master of ceremonies in terms of bringing everything together. You're the chef, and merely our comments are the ingredients.
I do really appreciate that.
That was my big swing for the fences. Like, this sounds a lot smarter than I am.
You have the voice too. I feel like you have a good voice that kind of like centers the conversation. You know,
I do, or Matt does.
Work. No,
Raph
you do,
does.
Raph. Yeah.
Oh shit. Well, thank you. Thank both of you guys. I appreciate that. I've been told I have a voice for radio, and no, I've been told I have a face for radio and a voice for silent movies.
I've heard voice for print.
I think most of you guys should hang out with some nicer people. That was the motto.
Speaking of voice for print, I feel like we should give the listener a little bit of background about who you gentlemen are and why I've invited you onto the show. Because you're not just 2 of my old drinking buddies, although, you know, we were drinking buddies back in our day, but you are also folks whose film opinions and just like media knowledge I totally respect. And I think part of that comes from, you know, what you guys studied and where you guys studied. So I feel like you should maybe give us a little bit of background about all of that good stuff. And Matt, why don't you kick us off? Tell us about your time at at the Newhouse School of Media, or whatever the hell it's called.
SI
Communications.
Public communications. Yeah, I mean, it's the best school, or one of the best schools for public communications. I studied specifically television, radio, and film. A lot of the other people that are Newhouse products, the Bob Costas's, everyone that basically ends up in sports, they typically do the broadcast media journalism, the BDJ. But I studied, how to shoot, edit, critique, really storytell as a whole, and that's really, in terms of being a consumer of media, it's really helped have more of a critical lens and discern my own opinions. But at the same time, like, what I do professionally is, I produce videos, I shoot, I edit, I write. I'm essentially the on-air talent, sometimes the interviewer, and
hell yeah,
it's the one-man band type deal, but in essence, like, it sounds a little cheesy, but like, really, you just learn to be a good storyteller and make sometimes the most mundane thing seem valuable.
Yes. So you are obviously someone who is qualified to talk about movies in a very intelligent and meaningful way, which again is why I wanted you to join for this episode. Go Newhouse. Yay.
Go Newhouse.
Go Newhouse. All right. So with that, I'll kick it over to Simon, who also has an academic background that makes him a good candidate to be on a podcast like this where we want to talk about movies. So Simon, why don't you walk us through some of your background and what you studied at Syracuse?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I went to Syracuse to go to Newhouse, and I was terrible at all the things that Matt is really, really good at. And so that can't write a script, can't make movies, can't do any of that stuff. But I know a lot about movies. I know a lot about movie history and how to watch movies and read movies and write about movies. So that is what I ended up doing, going from there to now getting my PhD in English, but with a focus on film studies and film and media history, and teaching film classes and all that stuff. Teaching interpretation of film next semester, so I feel incredibly qualified to talk about movies to people. Yeah, I'm sure at least Raph took that class. I don't know if Matt took that class.
Did we take that class together? No.
I don't know, because you were a year ahead of me, so I probably took it after you.
So you're teaching that next semester? What's on the syllabus?
Yeah.
Is Night of the Living Dead on the syllabus?
I think Night of the Living Dead is for sure going to be on the syllabus. I mean, that's just like a great film to teach, either for like just teaching horror or like, I don't know. It can be on in so many places. I've done that film in we now have an American cinema course, and we've definitely done Night of the Living Dead too. Right now I'm teaching world cinema, and I can't really work in Night of the Living Dead, but I try to work in some zombies at some point for sure.
Oh, okay. Wait, I think I want to talk to you off mic about your world cinema class. I want to hear what's on the syllabus for that.
Okay.
I really just want to hear about what's on the syllabus for all of these classes. But Matt, I don't think you took this class with us, but Simon and I, after we got back from our study abroad trip in London, Simon and I took a horror movie class that was great.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm gonna say famously, even though like I'm not famous enough for people to know this, but I famously hated horror movies. Like, I get scared really easily. But it was like one of two classes that were available that semester for our program. So I was like, screw it, I'll take it, even though like half of these movies are going to terrify me. And I'm pretty sure
incredible.
Night of the Living Dead was on that syllabus.
Yeah, it was on the syllabus. And I also distinctly remember Raph, like the very first day of class, was like, oh shit, we're watching Poltergeist, and this movie scared the shit out of me as a kid. And then, of course, we watch it in like a film screening in like a dark classroom, and the movie ends, and Raph stands up and goes, that wasn't shit. He's like, I'm not scared. Like, that's a great movie, but I'm not scared. Like, immediately.
But I made it out alive, and I feel like now I have a much greater appreciation for the genre as a whole, in ways that I would not have. Like, now a lot of those movies that I thought I was going to be terrified of are now movies that I love. Poltergeist, Night of the Living Dead, Halloween. I thought I was going to be terrified of Halloween. Scream. I remember we watched Scream. Hostel was cool. Matt, you really missed out, dude.
Dude, I just like, first off, to be in a class with both of you, I mean, nothing would have gotten done. We would have just been basically doing this.
That's true.
This would have been the discussion. It's just us three basically hosting a podcast 10 years prior. But like, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I equally, like, growing up, like, I did not have any desire to like watch horror films. Like, it didn't appeal to me at all. And like, I think the scariest movie that I ever saw as a young kid that like kind of turned me off from anything remotely scary, I think like I caught bits and pieces of Mars Attacks. That really threw me off.
Oh, what a
because
film!
The skeletons. Yeah. I mean, also like seeing that now, it's phenomenal because of everything surrounding it, the Tim Burton goofiness, but also it was Signs. That scene, like I feel like 9 out of 10 millennials always goes, yeah, dude, that scene where it walks by scared the crap out of me. I always had nightmares. So there, we got one, we got two. Raph, I don't know if you're our third, but like
for Signs, like that scene doesn't terrify me that much, but it also may be because the first time I saw it, I was like 28.
Okay. So that I was like 12.
It's different, bro. It's different.
It was, so it's definitely different. Hits different, but I never had that desire to like watch horror. And I think ultimately it was probably like when I was maybe 19, 20, like college age, that it was right when The Walking Dead came out. And I'm like, oh, like this is actually really well done. I like the storytelling. This is cool. Learning more about like, you know, the comic books and stuff that it came out from. And it like felt more accessible and palatable. Mm-hmm. And more like widely accepted, and therefore like I knew like zombie films as a whole and they had existed forever, but like this was like the first thing where I'm like, this makes zombies cool.
Dude, The Walking Dead was huge while we were in college. Huge.
It was like when those first couple seasons were like massive. It was like it was like Game of Thrones, you know, when Game of Thrones was big. It felt like that was the thing everyone was talking about.
When did you guys give up on The Walking Dead? What season?
Oh, I gave up really early, actually.
I think it was either season 4 or 5. That it was before they met Negan. It was definitely before they met Negan. It was after the prison. It was after Lori died. It was after the baby happened.
Okay, I vaguely remember the baby.
Yeah.
I think
I remember further than you, Rick.
I gave up somewhere in the prison scenario. Like
I think that's where
which I think is season 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think that was 3. Because 2 is the farm. 2 is the farm.
2 is the farm.
Yeah, but 2 was fucking boring. I'm sorry. That was like the most boring season of TV. There were no zombies. Everyone was like,
but there were budget
all
cuts.
The time.
There were budget cuts. And they took a look at the humanity of this. This is the same guy that's going to tell you that, dude, The Last of Us really takes a look at the humanity. It's really great storytelling. There's not a lot of zombies in there.
Last of Us comes up on the show a lot.
That's the rage right now.
And I've never seen or played Last of Us.
I really want to get in my impression of Rick from The Walking Dead.
Oh, okay.
Carl, you need to get supplies. That's it.
That was.
It's that loud whisper. It's really, you really nail it. You know,
it's like just
he's whispering, but he's yelling.
Half of the show is him whisper yelling, Carl.
What was the name of the RV guy? Was it Dale? The wide-eyed old guy? He's like, oh.
Was Dale? Oh no, Dale was no.
It was
Dale
season 1. Dale sat in that.
Oh, I'm thinking of Daryl.
Yeah.
And
then his older brother Merle came.
Yeah.
There is
Merle lost his hand.
Oh yeah, that's right. There is a character. I don't know if he's in the show though, because I didn't watch enough of the show. But there is a character in The Walking Dead named after the actor from Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, little
Yeah,
trivia.
there is a character named Dwayne Jones in The Walking Dead. I think it's like the kid, like the neighbor's kid or something at the beginning, which is
What
a
was his
reference
name?
to
Dwayne
Night of the Living
Johnson?
Dead. Dwayne Jones.
Dwayne the Rock Johnson?
Tim and Kevin Hart, and they
Dude, I love Jumanji. Like, it's just Jumanji, but with zombies.
But with zombies.
Yeah, I'm surprised those guys haven't done more of that. Yeah. Is that the guy? There's a random guy in the first episode who's with his son, and I guess a bunch of zombies come, and he's like, "Get away from the window!" And it's a super random throwaway line, but some of my other buddies from college, we used to quote that all the time. Like whenever someone was by a window, get away from the window.
That's it. I don't know. I don't remember from the show, but I remember in the comic book that is the name of that kid. Yeah,
interesting. And the window. That's a good. Hey, that's storytelling.
That's a good reference to. Yeah, I mean that's how they do it,
dude. That's crazy. All right, so we've got some background on how we all feel about horror movies in general. We've got some background about how you guys, know and understand movies, I think, in general. So people won't just be like, who are these jabronis? Why are they talking to me about Night of the Living Dead?
They might still say that, but that's okay.
Yeah, they might still say that. But if they do, it's not very nice. We don't like that. So I think we have enough of a background for us to actually get into the movie. You guys both gave really good transitions that could have been used to get into the movie, but I'm not going to use either one of them because it's my show and we do what I say. Damn it!
I am the captain now.
I am the captain now. Always and forever. I really appreciate the effort, but get out of here with that. So I feel like we like to start the conversation with just like a basic understanding of your first time watching the movie, sort of how you felt about this movie over time, your overall relationship with it. So, Simon, why don't you talk us through that first?
You want me to start? How deep do you want me to get?
Give us the vibe of like your general relationship to it.
All right.
Like, did you always love it? Did you hate it and then come to love it?
I think I didn't always love Night of the Living Dead. I think it's obviously like such an amazing film, and now it's one of my all-time favorites. But I think it's kind of a lot to get into if you're looking for like a bloody horror movie, because it is older, right? And you're not expecting the same thing. One of the things that I always feel I watch this movie is that I've seen this movie now like 20 to 25 times, and I could not tell you, the whole movie takes place in a farmhouse, and I couldn't tell you at all like what the rooms in the farmhouse are, because it's like a very claustrophobic movie. Every shot is like a close-up. They're like all arguing the whole movie in like intense close-up with each other. And I think the first time I watched it, I was probably young, and I was like, why are they all yelling at each other? Fight the zombie. But that's the point of the movie. That's the point.
When did you come to love the movie? Was it after viewing 4? Was it after viewing 24?
I think it might have been after viewing like 4 or 5 maybe, and like learning a little more context about like these guys made this movie for basically no money. There are basically no hired actors on the movie at all other than the 2 leads. That it's kind of just like a bunch of people like making a movie, and I think that's why the movie feels like so intimate when you watch it. That you're like literally watching like what, 2 couples and then Ben and Barbara, right? Like all in this like very cramped room yelling at each other the whole time and being horrified of whatever's outside. Don't, get away from the window, right? That I think it took me a while to appreciate that element of the movie. It's a little bit, if you've just watched like The Walking Dead or like modern zombie movies and you expect a gore fest, the indie movie from 1968 is not going to be the gore fest that you anticipate, right? So
yeah. Well, can I push back on that a little bit? Because I feel like fine. the one scene where it shows the zombies eating body parts is super gory. Like that's pretty intense, even for now. I think that's like,
well, and
I don't know.
And the scene like where whoever was in the farmhouse upstairs, like that first glimpse of the eaten face.
Oh, that's true.
The eye and the teeth,
yeah.
like, that was very jarring, and especially like because in the context of knowing like this movie was made in 1968, the special effects aren't there, like so like the bar, like you said earlier, is like okay, it's not going to be a gore fest, and then all of a sudden that happens. You're like, whoa, okay, maybe a little more than I expected. Yeah.
Matt, what's your background relationship with this movie?
This was my first viewing. I've only seen the film once. Yeah, I know. And like I'm kind of ashamed for not having seen it earlier. I think at the same token, like in my head, I was like, I always got anything of the Deads mixed up. Like I was like, oh yeah, Evil Dead 2, I think it's a part of that. No, clearly not. I've seen Evil Dead 2, no other. There we go. I've seen Evil Dead 2. I haven't seen any of the other films. I think I think maybe I saw Return of the Living Dead or something. I think it was made in the 80s, and it had to deal with like toxic nuclear sludge, and like it was campy, and like the main character guy like got zombified, and he could talk even though he's a zombie. He wanted brains. I don't know if that was part of Romero's.
That is Return. No, so that is Return of the Living Dead. But Return of the Living Dead is written by the guy who helped write Night of the Living Dead.
Okay.
John Russo.
Is Return of the Living Dead, is that also Romero?
No, it's directed by I don't remember who it's directed by, but John Russo is the guy that wrote helped write Return of the Living Dead. He and Romero had a falling out. And so that's why he took Living Dead and Romero took Of the Dead. And that's why Romero stopped using Of the Living Dead.
Well, look at that. So that's what I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Dude.
so nice on the interesting factoids.
Yeah. Nice to have a film historian here. You can keep sprinkling in those trivia nuggets all throughout. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you
Return
find your
of the Living Dead is an amazing movie, though. I love that. It's so funny.
But it had like a much more comedic, campier feel to it than this, which felt like basically just a sci-fi version of 12 Angry Men. You talk about
what a shout. Yeah. Please, continue. So, lead us down this road.
So it felt a lot more like, and to jump off of what Simon was saying earlier, it felt a lot like 12 Angry Men in terms of that exploring the space in which, argument and really power struggles and decision making occur. But again, you are only faced with 6 people in all. But like again, it's that tried and cliche term of like the real monsters are the humans. But like ultimately, that is what this film, I feel like, wrote the playbook on. Is like it's not what's outside that is terrifying and will lead to your demise. It's not working together, and there's a lot. I mean, that may be a little oversimplified and maybe trying to be a little too smart on it, but that's at least what I took away from it. So like in terms of everyone shouting and like the claustrophobic feel, it was more of that dynamic, that give and take between people's relationships and trying to survive and figure out what to do and make decisions of what's good for the individual and what's good for everyone in this farmhouse.
Yeah. Well, all right, now that we're here, I feel like this is a great topic of conversation for us to use to sort of like dive a little bit deeper into the movie, because like both of you guys are saying, this really is the whole movie. It is 12 Angry Men with zombies, which is totally a thought that I had while I was rewatching it. But the movie, it's hard to not see this movie in like a political light. And I feel like a lot of what Romero has said about the movie is that like he wasn't making something political or he wasn't making a political statement. But if you're looking at like 1960s America and the conversations, the debates that people were having, within their communities, within the society at large, like a lot of it kind of mirrors the conversations and the debates that people were having within that farmhouse.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, Simon, like, what do you have on that? What do you think about that?
I think there's I think there's a lot to do with that. I also think, right, this is a great movie to think about, like, does, like, the author's intention matter, right? Like, George Romero can say, like, all he wants, like, no, like, Dwayne Jones is just, the perfect actor to play Ben. There's no politics in having a black lead, and there's also, like, no politics in the rest of the movie. But, like, we watching that know that's not true, right? Like, from the context. It also, like, in that opening scene of the graveyard, like, one of the first shots after the car drives up is a grave with the American flag, like, centered on it. And you're like, dude, like, this is a political film. Like, what are you talking about? But thinking of it as, like, as it mirrors, right, like, the chaos that people are experiencing, like, in the late 60s, that scene where they're just watching the TV to figure out what's happening is so, like, to be sure that, like, for some people resonated with whatever was happening in their home, right? They're all yelling at each other. They're all like, pay attention. This is important. And, like, arguing about, in this case, like, whether or not some comet crashed or something. I don't even remember how many times I've seen this movie. But they're all having those arguments, right? So I don't know. That's what I think.
Matt, what do you think?
I definitely feel, right, like, knowing, because I did a little bit of background research after this just to get the general sense. Because, again, meeting
preparation.
Ben, well, yeah, but
big.
like meeting Ben, and this being the first time that I saw the film, like, going into it cold turkey, meeting Ben and knowing this film was in the 60s, I'm like, okay, this just got interesting. What's going on? This is a rural farmhouse in Pennsylvania. This is probably not going to be the most welcome place for him, even if zombies weren't there. So, yeah. So, like, but, like, doing some more of like the little background stuff, like, I and Simon, please back me up or correct me if this is wrong. I heard and read that, like, again, to say, like, follow up what Raph was saying about how Romero didn't want this to be a political film, that they found out that Martin Luther King was shot, like, as they were driving one of the cuts or one of the edits. So it was, like, the film had already been shot and produced, and that's when Martin Luther King got shot. And not to spoil the ending, but it's like the one black guy in the film gets shot, and he's an innocent, person. He just happens to be, caught in this, posse, and they're not taking any chances. Like, it seems a little too coincidental, right? Like, to make that specific casting choice, and, like, it is subtle to certain extents. It's
Ben
and it's hard not to. Yeah, I was just saying, it's hard not to read that moment where he gets shot, like, as a moment of, like, especially like state sanctioned racial violence, right? Like, a bunch of cops with the dog, like, the dogs are barking in that scene. Like, it really seems like, right, they're going after him, even though in the plot it's not. It feels like it, right?
They're very militia coded, and militias are very coded to a certain political affiliation that doesn't typically jibe with people of Ben's background, we'll say.
That's true, yeah.
That is a very eloquent way of putting it. Wow. What a wordsmith.
Yeah, we're trying, man. We're trying. It's hard, right? It's like a hard movie to talk about in that regard, because there is so much that's great about this movie outside of that. But then when you also layer on the racial tension aspect that, like, may or may not be present there, it just becomes such a juicier movie.
Yeah.
So, sort of circling back to the characters within the house. So we've got Ben, who is our main character, and the main guy that he's at odds with, I'm forgetting his name, but he's
Cooper, Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, Mr. Cooper, the father of the sick daughter. But it's like, even so, like, let's take Ben's race out of it. And if Ben is played by a white guy, there's still to me, pretty clear, like, political clashing that's happening between the, Ben, who's like, hey, we should all, like, work together in order to save ourselves from the zombies. And, like, we all have a part to play and a role to play in making that happen. and Mr. Cooper is like, I'm going to stay downstairs with my family and only care about protecting them. And like, whatever happens to you guys, I don't give a shit because I got to take care of me and my own family. And it's sort of like, that's like the struggle of American politics, time and time again, of how much do we like, maybe not even like beyond, like it goes beyond America, how much do we owe to each other? How much do we need to like work together as a community? How much should we just like rely on ourselves to make things happen? I don't know if you guys were picking up on that aspect from Mr. Cooper at all.
For sure. Like especially like as it's maybe oversimplified by saying it's being proactive versus what's the word I'm looking for? Not ignorant.
Reactive?
Well, not even reactive.
Something
like
else.
Ignorant. Well, not ignorant. What's another word for ignorant? I feel like an idiot. I'm
like stubborn, arrogant, something like that.
No, not disinterested. Shit. It's like you don't care. You don't care what happens because it doesn't affect you. What's that? Unaffected. I don't know. That's not the word I'm looking for, but that with Ben's approach of let's be a team. You have this role. Let's board these up. Even like before we met the gang from the basement, Ben's telling Barbara, like, I need help breaking down this stuff so we can board up the windows, board up the door, like get those nails, like let's search for stuff. He's being proactive and just taking charge. Whereas then all of a sudden you meet Mr. Cooper and the young couple, and it almost feels like, well, we just want to stick our head in the sand and wait till this blows over. And then, but Ben is like, no, dude, like the radio is up here. The food is up here. Like, so we might as well do it here. Like, so there are some really good, now that you bring it up, like I can see those real life political parallels that could be made for a number of different things where you either it's fight or flight. Yeah. And that's really a really good examination of that.
There's a weird way in which like Ben seems to be the only character. Not that the young couple helps a little bit as well, although they ultimately fry themselves.
I was going to say, kind of burned them in the end.
Yeah. But where Ben is the only character who like is acknowledging the situation, and every other character is doing some form of like, I want to restore order and like have what I had before people were rising from the dead, right? That like Mr. Cooper's like, I want to stay with my family, and Barbara keeps being like, we have to go get Johnny, and it's like, what the fuck are you all talking about? Like there's like 15 zombies surrounding this farmhouse, and you're like, what? No.
Johnny. I love that Johnny's death isn't even, he doesn't get bitten by the zombie or anything.
No, it's like a bad concussion. Like a really bad concussion.
Like he might be okay. I mean, he might survive. He won't be okay, but there's a chance that he survived that.
Yeah, but he doesn't in the end. He doesn't in the end, right?
Yeah. No,
but
there's
he might have survived for like a little bit longer, like stumbling around out there.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Stumbling, and then he got bit. It was the concussion. Yeah. It was the concussion. He ran into a guy who was like, I can't fight, got bit. Then that was the zombification.
How do you think a concussed zombie operates? Just like a regular zombie, or
I think zombies are already brain dead, right?
But that's a good question, because if you have to kill a zombie by like, a fatal blow to the brain, at what point is the blow fatal, right? Like how much can you do before it impacts the zombie?
Can you just
that's a good question.
And give it really bad whiplash, and you have the zombies play football and a bunch of them get concussed.
CTE.
And they just die. Yeah.
We need to write this script. The actual zombies have CTE.
Yeah.
That's the modern day political version of Night of the Living Dead. But
there's something there. There's something there for sure.
It'll get shut
let's
down.
Let's get off the politics of it all. There's
okay.
There's a lot of other stuff that we should be talking about with this movie. You brought up the couple that got fried, and I feel like we should circle back to them because their frying is pretty hilarious. And there aren't that many deaths in this movie, but I feel like one of the great things about talking about horror movies is we get to ask the question of what is the best death?
Yeah.
What do you guys have for that? Simon, who do you
That's
have?
a good question. Oh, man. I mean, This movie is like top to bottom good death. Like again, like it's not huge, right? Like the body count is not super stacked, right? I've seen movies with bigger body count, but it has a lot of quality ones. I do feel like Mrs. Cooper's death is the best death in the movie. Like just getting stabbed with the little like
a trowel
garden thing or whatever. Yeah, the trowel, and it's just like the echoing sound effect of her scream. It's like a random like moment that's like not realism, but it's so good.
Yeah,
like when she does it, it's like that dull sound. I've seen this movie a lot of times, and when I rewatched it, that like just like oh fuck, dude,
like
damn.
It's weird, like the camera's doing a zoom in, zoom out too.
Yeah,
so, like,
it's crazy.
It stylistically, that sequence seems out of place, but again, like I think that whole mix of it all between what Simon said, the echoing like screams and just kind of this weird droning, and like there's like that little shot of the blood spatter. It was stylistically different than what the film we were watching. And then it really heightened everything of like, oh man, this like, it's not even like it was the first time, because like when they're talking in the news reports about like there's this surge in homicides, like murderous maniacs, like going into this, I'm like, oh yeah, like they're just strangling, fighting, like biting. No, like this zombie is using a tool to murder someone. So that was cold-blooded murder. It wasn't like going after her to bite her. It was, I'm going to stab you so I can eat you. And that was definitely different.
That might be the kill of the movie. That's like a very disturbing sequence.
Yeah, it is.
You don't get a lot of shots of the daughter's face, but when she like first gets up, like the blood coming out of her eyes and stuff is terrifying. And again, I feel like we've talked about this, where this is a movie from 1967, 68.
Yeah.
And like you watch an old movie like this and you think with modern audience sensibilities, it's not going to scare us that much. It's not going to shock us that much. The gore isn't going to be like what we're used to seeing, but this movie is terrifying. And that scene in particular, that shot of the daughter's face, and then those moments where she's stabbing her mom, like I wanted to hide my face behind my hands. Like that was tough to watch.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. It's also like it also happens like just after everything unfolds. So it's like you think, and I always forget that Ben just shoots Mr. Cooper, right? Like I always forget that he just shoots him, which is honorable mention, best death maybe of the movie, that he just turns around and blasts him. But right that like he's falling down the stairs. I think Barbara's already died, right? And you're like, okay, like it's all gone to shit. How could it get any worse right now?
See her die,
right? Yeah.
Just like her brother, she could have survived that, I think.
Yeah.
But, but I definitely want to talk about the lead up of Barbara and then the lack of payoff for that stringing along about Barbara. Anyway, back to the deaths. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Just that, like, you're like, basically, you're like, oh my God, like, everything is falling apart. And then the little girl gets up. And it's like, it like slaps you in the face, right? That's like, oh, you think everything's gone to shit. Here's something that's going to scare you even more. And that's like an example of a scene that makes this movie so effective, even though it's now more than 50 years old, right?
Yeah. Like, really quick side note, but everyone in this movie has such a 1960s face.
Yep.
Like, when you picture people who were alive in the 60s, it's this movie.
It's this movie, dude.
That's all.
So
maybe that's because. Yeah, go, Matt.
Talking about what they look like in the 60s, one of the details that like rubbed me the wrong way, in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, Mr. Cooper is still wearing a buttoned up shirt with his tie still done. Like, no. Like, what don't you understand? That is a liability, sir. You could be grabbed. You could be choked. Like, what is this guy? Like, also, like, not even like from that danger. Like,
when men dress like men, man.
Yeah. Gotta look fashionable while
you have to maintain order, dude. You have to maintain order.
When people cared about their appearance.
And maybe, right? I mean, not to circle back to that political thing, but maybe that is like, that was maybe a subtle way of saying this guy doesn't change from his white collar attire to maintain this perception that he is the most legitimate leader, if you will.
Well,
anyway,
Ben is also wearing like a weird, like Mr. Rogers ass sweater.
Yeah.
Which I didn't appreciate. Which also makes me think that like maybe Romero his intention wasn't to make a movie about social like race commentary, because like why would you put a black man in that ridiculous sweater?
I have two trivia side notes about this. So one of the reasons that's funny is that like everyone who worked on this movie, except for Dwayne Jones as Ben and I think it's Judith O'Dea as Barbara. I hope I didn't get that wrong. They were the only professional actors. Everyone else worked in advertising, which is interesting, right? Like everyone else like worked in like making images, including like the guy who plays Mr. Cooper and the woman who plays his wife. She was the creative director and he worked at another advertising company. But the company that Romero worked at did do some work for Mr. Rogers, because this is a Pittsburgh movie and Mr. Rogers was a Pittsburgh scenario. And so George Romero did shoot some shorts for Mr. Rogers, and apparently Carl Hartman, the actor who played Mr. Cooper, wanted someone who was on Mr. Rogers to be in the movie, and Fred Rogers was like, no way. Like, that's not happening.
That is amazing.
Wild, dude. So maybe they got the costume designer.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was the loophole for them. They got
one of his sweaters.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Yeah, until it's not. Until the dead come back to life. And
until the truck is on fire.
Which is also, like, to her credit, Barbara, who gets some flack sometimes, people watch the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Barbara is realizing that everything's gone to shit, but she's just, like, catatonic the whole time, right? So, like, maybe also props to Barbara a little bit.
Let's, we're going to have to talk about the zombie of it all, as well as some other things, but let's talk about Barbara first. Matt, I know you had some thoughts on Barbara.
Oh, he looks
on good old Babs.
Good old Babs. I love that. It's the 60s, man. All right, Babs. So, like, watching that, so knowing the playbook, this is the playbook of, we've seen shows or films where, like, the zombie playbook is like, oh, like someone's trying to hide a bite or something like that.
Yeah.
And, like, they ultimately end up turning. Like, that's always like the big thing. Like, oh man, like we try to have compassion, but like it ended up, literally biting us. I definitely thought I picked up on these clues of like her like all of a sudden going catatonic, then her talking about how hot it was. I was like, dude, I think she either got scratched or bit or something. They're gonna reveal, much like the daughter downstairs had some sort of injury that zombified her. Barbara is going to be the one that turns, and then they're going to be faced with a danger upstairs and downstairs. And then, like, ultimately, like, that just went nowhere. And so I was like, she was going to be a zombie, like, and now we don't get to see that. Like, I wanted that payoff, and it wasn't there. So, like, maybe I was misreading cues all along, but, like, I thought because of every zombie thing I've ever consumed, Barbara was going to become a zombie. And like, then they're like, oh, our daughter's sick downstairs too. I'm like, oh man, they got this infighting, and then they're going to have to deal with two zombies that they're like, oh, but we just met these people. This is my daughter. I love her. Yeah. Double zombie apocalypse time. And now they're boarded in. So they got to rip all that out and get out. But it wasn't. That wasn't it. So I don't know if you guys thought that same way or picked up on those clues, but like, it was redlining to me, like just telegraphed to me that Barbara was going to become a zombie and they were going to have to deal with her.
That's so interesting because it's so rare to like talk to someone who hadn't seen this movie before, right? Like, because it's so popular, right? That watching it for the first time after having seen a lot of other zombie things, right? Rather than this being your first zombie experience, that leads to like a totally different expectation is really interesting. I like that. Yeah. That's cool.
I've never had that reading whatsoever, but it makes sense as a audience member in 2023 to be thinking that all of those clues that we were giving were pointing towards Barbara being a zombie. So I also think this leads us into the most interesting, probably the most critical part of the conversation about this movie. The zombie genre is massive in its own right. You know, we've talked about some other movies and TV shows that are in it. The Walking Dead was a comic book first. There's all kinds of media around zombies, and it all comes back to this. So I think maybe, Simon, we kick it to you first as our resident trivia guy. What do you have for us on this kickstarting the whole zombie everything, just all of it? Like, it all comes back to this, right?
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I wish I had something more intellectual to say about like this, like being the zombies in the kids. I think one of the things that's interesting about it, like culturally, is that like it mostly kicks off the rules of zombies, right? Like you gotta hit their head, and that, you know, if you're doing the Romero zombies, they gotta be slow, right? And if you want to do like, I don't know, World War Z or whatever, they can be fast. But you have to make that clear at the outset now. That's almost like a rule now, right? Like, are you doing Romero zombies or are you doing something else, right? I think that's interesting. And not to tie it back to independent film history, but I'll do
Please
it anyway. But it's interesting, right, that this movie famously, like, is so many people have seen it because it's in the public domain. Right? And that it's a movie that was on everywhere. And so it makes sense that people who made like media in the future would be inspired by this movie, because it was on every TV station, like late at night when they had horror hosts, or even just like on public access channels. And literally like in the 80s, any company could just make a videotape and like sell it with Night of the Living Dead on it. So it makes sense that this is the one. Like, it's not like it's the absolute very first zombie movie, right? Like, there are other zombie movies before this. Like, even, like, Carnival of Souls before that is almost a zombie movie. White Zombie is, like, 20 years before it, and more, right? So there are other zombie movies, but this becomes the one, I think, because it was so easily accessible to so many people. And that's also probably why it was so scary to some people who maybe watched it late at night on TV when they were a little too young to watch it, perhaps.
What I liked about it in terms of, right, like trying to put myself in the mindset of someone as a viewer in 1960, right? Like, it just from the world at large, like the Cold War, all this other stuff, space exploration, like this 1967, 1968. There's so much unknowns out there. And for the fact of, like, we talk about writing the rules, every bit of like zombie apocalypse, like what causes this is like, it's some either supernatural or like a toxic accident, like something like that. And so for the fact, like, they really used not just like outlandish science fiction, but they're like, hey, listen, I forgot exactly what it was, but it was like the satellite or something from Saturn or whatever, the radiation, like that also like had some maybe residual stuff, like, hey, radiation, like, it was right before Chernobyl and stuff like that, but like talking about, like, when you hear radioactive at this point in time, you think nuclear bomb, like there's no way around it. So like that immediately, anything radioactive is scary inherently. So then the fact that that is a real threat in your life, and then go, well, what could this happen? Like, could living beings be brought back to dead from radioactivity? That's really scary. So like, there's this little bit of blind ignorance in terms of science of like being like, dude, like, could this happen? We don't know. Like, we haven't dealt with radioactive levels like that strong. Like, but like that actually might be. Yeah,
that's a really interesting take that I've never really thought about, because like this movie does exist within the Cold War period and all of those anxieties. And a movie that we talked about earlier this season in the canon is Doctor Strangelove, which I think came out around the same time, but or maybe a few years earlier, but that's like taking on those anxieties head on. Whereas this movie, Matt, like you're saying, it's sort of playing around with them in a more interesting and like loose kind of way, that you're maybe not picking up on automatically because there's so much else going on. But like that aspect of it is like definitely there for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because that's like an underlying, right? Like the sort of the Cold War. Because I mean, we often think of this as being connected to Vietnam in some way, but less the sort of Cold War and the space element, which I like the space element. That's cool. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Because it is, I think you mentioned this before too, Matt, but it is like, it's a science fiction movie, which I've never thought of it as. But with the radiation stuff, I guess just with that, but there is a science element to it.
But well, like it's just the reanimation point, right? Like it's the granddaddy of reanimation is, you know, Frankenstein's monster. That is reanimation. And so like, but it's always been interesting now to like, again, this writes the rules like 9 times out of 10, it's like some sort of radioactive or toxic sludge. And like now that we've like reached this modern level, they're like, nah, man, it's a disease. It's a disease. We're like, oh man, we don't know much about diseases. Like, there could be. Who knows?
Dude, I think because that's how so many modern zombie stories, like that's the frame, that it's disease. I think I just had always thought that Night of the Living Dead was disease based.
Right.
I didn't even think about I like tune out the scenes where they're talking about the radiation. Like the scene in DC.
I know. I'm like focused on they're all watching it on TV rather than like what they're actually watching. I'm just like, this is ridiculous. They're sitting around watching TV.
Yeah. Like, that guy has a silly mustache on the TV.
Yeah, silly mustache. One guy's a military expert because he's in military, you know, attire.
Yeah.
But and just to like kind of do a callback about all this, the arguing back and forth within the farmhouse, like even that scene, the scientist and the military guy are arguing as they're being interviewed by the news station. They're like, no, that hasn't been proven yet. Like, so like it is just this constant teeter totter. And now that I'm saying this out loud, there's that other point where they're like, well, we actually just found out that staying inside isn't the best thing to do. You should go and seek one of the shelter, you know? So like, there's this constant teeter totter of like, who is right or what is right. And there's constant just back and forth of, oh, nope, that actually turns out not right. Nope.
Yeah. Which also becomes like, which becomes like a lot of the human drama when you now watch zombie stuff or like Walk of the Dead, like that is like the contentious. Of course, it is interesting that Night of the Living Dead, like they never say zombie once.
Yeah, ghoul,
ever,
right?
Right. They say ghoul, and that's kind of which maybe kind of put the focus more on like, I don't know, some of the background stuff that like Matt was talking about, right? If it's not about like the zombie, maybe it's about that other stuff. I don't know.
Well, Simon, I was wondering if you had this piece of information for us in your pool of trivia, but where did zombie come from? How did zombie get like attached? How did that word get attached to this movie? Was it set in another movie? Because they're called ghouls in this.
So they're called ghouls in this. That's a great. So I can't give you like the whole etymological history.
Come on,
but like the term zombie did exist. But like when you think about like old classic films like White Zombie, like it was often connected to like voodoo, like and that like idea, and so it was actually racialized in a different way, right? So I think like Romero making this movie probably never thought that they would be zombies, right? He would probably just not have used that term because he would have thought that was just about something else. It was definitely not about radiation for him, that term, right? So that could be part of it. I do know that he originally wanted to call this film Night of Anubis, because Romero is a great filmmaker who doesn't know how to title a movie to save his life, I think. But I guess eventually he got convinced not to call it that. And the film the print they made was called Night of the Flesh Eaters. That was what they were just going to call it, Night of the Flesh Eaters. And then the distributor picked up the movie, which was the Walter Reed organization, because Columbia didn't want a movie that was in black and white, even though they kind of wanted this movie. Picked it up, and I forget why, but for some reason they decided Flesh Eaters was not good. So they picked Night of the Living Dead, and so that's where like the Living Dead come from. Like not a Romero idea at all.
Interesting.
It's kind of interesting, yeah. And it's when they edited out, because they had the master, they edited out the title, which was supposed to have the copyright notice. They didn't put a copyright notice.
And that's why it's in the public domain?
That's why it's in the public domain, because it was screened without a copyright notice. So that it's not like some people, it's like an apocryphal story that like George Romero forgot. That's not true at all. He really wanted to copyright this movie and make some money off of it. And they ended up not making it. It was successful in theaters, but it very quickly got just anyone could show it. So.
Wow. That's.
My mind is blown.
You're bringing some of the best trivia that we've ever had on the show.
I'm glad. Bringing the knowledge.
Yes. This is the real knowledge that we need. Holy crap. That's amazing.
I'm really lucky you asked me to do this for a movie I know a lot about. Like, you could have asked me to do it for a movie I didn't know anything about.
You picked the guy that knows the most about this movie and the guy who literally just saw it because you asked us to do this movie for this podcast. I like this dynamic.
I'm loving this dynamic. I'm really digging it. It's perfect. It's really working out for us. Wow. I don't even know how to move on from that. So we've talked about the zombie of it all, which is obviously so big for the lasting legacy of this movie. And when we talk about movies that are in the canon, part of it is what is their lasting legacy on cinema? And it's pretty hard to have a lasting legacy bigger than the creation of a full ass genre. There are now thousands of zombie movies, and most, if not all of them, can be traced back to this movie. So that is like super important for us to talk about when talking about this movie. But another thing, Simon, that I think you mentioned much earlier on that I think is also super interesting for this movie is the fact that this was made for like $0 and how you can sort of see that in the film itself. This film is also like really unconventional in like the way that it's shot and edited. Like a lot of the editing beats are like really, really, really weird.
They're really weird, and like no scene has any establishing shot. It just goes from like close up to close up. You're just like, where am I in this?
Where am
house?
I? What am I doing? So I want to ask the question of like, do you think that quirkiness is more so due to the fact that they had no money, or do you think any of that is artistic intent of like, we want to confuse you geographically within this house that you're in to make things that much scarier, and the editing beats are a little bit off, so you're always kind of like uneasy in terms of what's happening next? Or do we just not have enough money to focus on these things the way that we maybe wanted to?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both for me, because I think George Romero shot almost every scene of this movie, except for the scene with the general that Matt mentioned, because George Romero is the news reporter in that scene, so he's not behind the camera in that scene. So I do think a lot of that is intent. I think he really liked the weird angles, and it's like from the get-go. Like even the very first scene where the first zombie in the cemetery like smashes the windshield of the car, you're like fucking in the car when that happens. Like that rock like hits the viewer in the face. Right? It's like really close. So I do think a lot of that is intention. I think some of that intention is enabled by the fact that the movie was made very cheaply and that he basically had to film and edit a lot of it himself. So like whether you think some of it is like just kind of weird and doesn't make sense, or it's exactly his intent and it's brilliant, it's up to you, I think, in some way, right? Like I think it's because he had a lot of control over it for me.
Matt, where do you fall on that?
I think one of like it's definitely low hanging fruit to like just be like the opening sequence alone. Like I was like watching the opening sequence, I was always a big fan of how each shot, every beat in this film was framed, because like I'm just a big fan aesthetically of like the composition of framing. Like things looked good. The edits were like odd at at certain pacing, so it did feel jarring. But that opening sequence of just the palatial rolling hills, and like, it honestly is a masterclass of continuity. Like, you show that to any college film student of like, this is how a car should go in and out of frame and makes sense. Like, it just, we're moving, but it also, like, it set this eerie tone with especially the music, but it was also just this slow drawn out process. Like, what are we going to? Like, if you didn't know what this movie was, if you didn't see a trailer at all, you just went to this film, didn't hear anything about it, all you see is Night of the Living Dead, as without copyright, as the title card. And it's just this driving thing. And then all of a sudden you see that cemetery sign with, it looked like it had shotgun pellets blown through it.
Yeah.
Which like, okay, like, I don't know if that was intentional, but like it was very artistic in that sense. And then again, like, that felt like, okay, that was a great exhibition and introduction. And then everything, like, honestly, it felt like you could do everything that's inside the house as a stage play. Like, outside of like some of maybe the weird camera movements and like tight close-ups, but like, it was in and of itself kind of confined in that moment, in that tense, whatever the intensity was within the building.
Matt brings up a good point also, which is that the opening of the movie, right, with the car going up to the cemetery, is a shot we often see in horror films now, like particularly in the like cabin in the woods subgenre, which this movie also kind of feels like it's a part of because they're just
for sure.
In the that often is how those movies start, right, with like the car going to the cabin. But the difference is that, and Raph will remember this from college, in our horror movie class, that they often say that, like, I think you will, that like horror is like normality is threatened by like the monster or the force or whatever the thing is, right? That so often that shot is like the like shot of the normality, right? The teenagers are going to have their drunken weekend or whatever, you know, but like, Matt's right. Then you get the like, there's like shotgun hold on the cemetery. Like from the get go, you're like, what are they doing here? Like they're in this empty cemetery and they're immediately like, why is it still light out? It's 8:00. What the fuck? Like it immediately starts unsettling. They drove 3 hours to this grave and they're going to get back past midnight. It's already like things are off at the beginning, which is really interesting. It's like already like kind of subverting whatever you think is going to happen to it.
Hella interesting. Great callback to why am I forgetting the name of our professor?
I don't remember his last name.
But great callback to that guy.
Matt. Yeah.
Great callback to Matt.
That's awesome. I guess like there's something like he always remembers that I was obsessed with Transformers, so he's always like, "Have you seen the Michael?" Every time he sees me, he like references a Michael Bay movie. And I'm like,
I forgot.
Do this for me?
I forgot.
That's amazing.
No, I totally.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm 30 years old, dude. Stop.
So this is like the biggest thing though, because Michael Bay's an auteur was like my favorite thing Simon's ever said. I forgot. How can I forget such a
How did
gem?
you forget about Michael Bay as an auteur? 5 best movies of all time: Transformers 3, Transformers 2, Bad Boys 2. I forgot what the other one was, and then Transformers.
Pearl Harbor, maybe, I don't know.
I still love Michael Bay, man. I don't care.
Yeah,
I thought Ambulance was cool.
I didn't see that.
Stop.
I thought Ambulance was a nice little movie. I don't care what anyone says. I don't give a shit. But yeah, man, it's cool how they use like the geography of the house to really like make you feel unsettled. I feel like that's another thing that horror movies do. Very famously done in The Shining, which we're going to be talking about on the Canon next week. But I think this movie has a bit of that, where it's sort of, you know, subconsciously keeping you on your toes and uneasy about where things are, where people are in relationship to each other. where the zombies are and all of that stuff. And again, I don't know if it's budget or intent.
Yeah, it's probably both, right? And it's from the get-go because she gets in the house and it's not like she has a moment where she's like, oh, thank God, like I'm safe here, right? She gets in and it's like super dark. It has the weird like hunting trophies on the wall, and then you see the woman upstairs. Like it's immediately like, no,
and then
this
you see a
house
black
is
man.
not safe. And then she feels scared, I guess.
She's like, "Oh my God!"
People do write about that scene as being like some sort of awareness of like racism that she's afraid of him initially is like conscious on like both of their parts in terms of performance. So you could be right.
That's the beautiful thing about movies, especially a movie like Night of the Living Dead. Like you said, Simon, it doesn't matter what the author's intent is. There's so many different ways that we can be reading this on so many different levels. There are thousands of think pieces and video essays that are out there that folks can look at if they're interested in, you know, a different aspect or different aspects of Night of the Living Dead and sort of like what it's about. Like what do the zombies represent? You know, what do the people within the house represent? What is the car blowing up to a crisp represent?
We have to talk about the car blowing up to a crisp though, because that whole scene where the young guy, Tom, whatever his name is, right? He's like,
Tom and Judy.
I gotta do it. Yeah, he's like, I can do it because I can handle the gas thing. And then what happens when they go out there? But he is the one that like sprays the gas everywhere on the fire. Like, dude, come on.
Also,
well,
like
this movie is.
If you're doing that, spray the zombies on fire. I mean, granted, you have zombies on fire. But they're not fast moving. You're at least maybe deteriorating them.
But in the newscast, they say that one of the best ways to get rid of zombies is fire. You either shoot them in the head or you burn them.
Burn them. And they're right next to a gas thing, so maybe they should have rethought some of those ideas they had
in the moment.
The fact that dude couldn't do the one thing that he said that he could do reminds me of something that we have talked about in past episodes of the show. But people in movies, or when people go to movies, we really love watching just competence, and I think that's why we love Ben. He's the only competent person in that entire house.
He is.
Everyone else is so useless, and it's which is why the ending hits, you know, so much harder, because he's the one person who deserved to live through that night. He was the only one keeping things together, who, you know, was keeping the other folks in that house alive, no matter how much they wanted to, not actually wanted to, but like no matter how much by their actions they were just like begging to die, he was still able to keep them alive for way longer than they should have. And I think that's part of why that final moment is just like so gutting. So I feel like we're in a good place where we can talk about the ending of this movie and just like what it means for the movie as a whole. And Matt, I want to start with you as a first time watcher. How did you respond to that ending in terms of like how you felt about the movie as a whole?
So how the ending made me feel, and I'm not just trying to say this to appear smarter than I actually am, which is very tough against the intellectual likes of Simon when it comes to this topic. But it felt, I think the reason why, as I'm watching this film, it felt like an extended episode of The Twilight Zone, where I was like, oh, there's going to be a cruel twist of fate here, like something. And like, I'm like, Ben is too competent, like he's withstood like all these mishaps, the truck going on fire, the little girl downstairs turning, like, you know, Barbara just being completely useless. And I'm like, dude, this guy's gonna die somehow. Like once they started doing the posse thing, I'm like, he like either like hurt his leg or something and he's gonna be limping and then the cops are gonna see him and then they're gonna shoot him. And they're like, nah, like they just saw him from within. And he's holding a gun. So it's not even like, oh, a zombie's holding a gun. But then again, The little girl held a trowel, so zombies might have experience with zombies using other tools. That's an aside. But that was me just making bullshit. But,
Romero does love zombies with tools. There's something about that, like all of his movies. He loves them with tools. Yeah,
which is like such a novel idea. Like I just thought they just used brute force as they talked about 15 of them flipping a card. It's like that's how they do it. But I felt like I saw the ending. Like I was getting this feeling in my stomach. Maybe right after he shot Mr. Cooper, I'm like, Ben's alive, but he's gonna like die. They're gonna try to if the rescuers come around, they're gonna shoot him, or he's gonna they're gonna light the house on fire and he's trapped inside or something like that. And that kind of Twilight Zone-esque ending kind of was on the horizon for me because I'm like, oh, this would be a very I don't want to say fulfilling way, but it does seem like it's not all this movie isn't about happy endings. It's about this watch everything go wrong, and the one guy who did it right still got it wrong. The fate, fate's a bitch. In more or less. in an ineloquent way.
Fate's a bitch.
Fate's a bitch.
I love that. Yeah. That's the right reading, though. I think that's the right reading.
Yeah.
Simon, what's your reaction, or just what are your thoughts on the whole ending?
Yeah, I think Matt's right in that it does fit the tone. Right, this is a dark movie, and I think that's part of why it's so effective. It's so many horror movies do end with some sort of restored order, and that this movie doesn't is really unsettling for us. I think as a viewer, and I think it could be if you're first time watching, maybe you don't expect it, or maybe you do, as if it's someone like Matt, right? But either way, it's still very shocking because the movie doesn't just end at that point. It just stops. He says go in and pick up the body, and then it cuts to the still photograph, which I think are some of the most disturbing shots in the film, right? The guy's standing there and they have the hooks in their hand. And it's kind of hard not to read that as particularly because of the rates of death. It's kind of hard not to read that as a lynching scene. I feel that it feels even though those are still photographs, they're very zoomed in and they're kind of distorted, and it feels in some ways as disturbing as the zombie barbecue moment is after the burned up truck. It feels like some of the most disturbing images of the film right there.
Yeah,
I feel is that final ending shot.
And
that's
for
the name
some
of
reason,
my new
them
indie band. Zombie barbecue moment. Zombie barbecue moment.
Yeah,
we're gonna be big. I'm sorry, Raph.
Yeah,
no,
sorry.
That was important. That was important. That's that's a great name for a band, Zombie Barbecue. I didn't even know what I was gonna say.
Sorry. What a dick. I'm sorry.
No, that was so worth it. That was we needed to know that.
Yeah.
No, God, I'm sorry. I'm fucking this up. Raph is I just want to make my podcast. You don't need to be funny. You don't need to be on that.
I need this to be funny. We can't just.
Okay.
I'm the straight man. You're doing it right, Matt. You're doing it right.
We need some zombie barbecue. We need some zombie barbecue in our lives.
Zombie barbecue moment.
All I was gonna do was reiterate what Simon said. I was just gonna say, the fact that there's still images makes those more disturbing than if it was, moving images that were playing at the end of the movie. That's all I was gonna say. That's useless. No one needs that. We need zombie barbecue.
But no, it feels more real though, right? It almost feels like those photographs were in someone's personal collection of here's our scrapbook of the posse.
It's no longer a movie, and then it's kind of reality.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I mean, you could try. It doesn't have to make sense, right? But why do those make sense in the story of the film, right? Are those images they saved for later? Is this in the newspaper a week later after it's all blown over? Kind of feels like newsprint, but it's kind of undetermined, and that's also kind of unsettling because you are just there as if you were what the hell, dude? It just ends.
Yeah. So. Also, in those, I guess because they're just still images and not moving images, we like don't get the sense of whether or not they walked up and were maybe like, oh, this was a real human person. This was not a zombie. You know, we don't get that. So we just assume, maybe we don't assume. It could go either way. You could assume that they walk up and they're like, oh, fuck, we killed a guy. We just killed a random guy. But whatever, throw him into the pile. Or if they walked up and were like, they were like, oh, just another zombie, another one in the books, and they keep on moving. And because there's that uncertainty, I don't know if that adds to the discomfort that we're feeling, but it is really interesting that those images do stick with you the way that they do, as not like the royal you.
Have we thought about, though, revisiting the cost, the budgeting factors of the film? Maybe they ran out of actual film and we're like, oh shit, we gotta, what can we do? You know what? Just take pictures. We'll do like a slideshow thing at the end. Yeah. And that, but like the way that you guys are actually describing it, like, I don't know, it does seem more so that artistic reason of, I feel like someone was like, no, it'd be way more unsettling for it to not be, it'd feel hokey, right? To see that in motion, where it was just more so
to watch them like walking up to the house, like it doesn't.
Yeah,
I don't know. It doesn't sit right. Maybe because the story like ends with him.
Yeah.
That's why there are so many different readings that you can take for that ending. Yeah. But
I don't have any trivia for that moment, but I do know with like 99, not 100%, but like 99% certainty that George Romero is not the one that shot the still images actually, but Carl Hardman, the guy who plays Mr. Cooper, is the one that took the pictures. I don't know what you do with that, but because they were kind of the two, like, the Mr. Cooper is the one that takes the pictures. Like, kind of changes things, bro.
But we thought he died. How is he taking pictures if his character died? It makes no sense, man.
He lived on.
Yeah.
The spirit of,
He's a zombie.
Yeah.
I wonder what happens when they go to the house and, like, Barbara is a zombie downstairs and the mom is a zombie downstairs and Cooper is a zombie upstairs. I guess it's not really important at all to think about.
But they may be like, what the fuck happened here, bro?
Yeah. Maybe that's another reason why it's still images, because then we don't have to think about that stuff.
And it's just weird because like it doesn't end with like, how many horror movies end with like the person who survived like sitting on an ambulance, you know? Like they all end with that.
Yeah.
Like they're there, you know?
With the blanket, but like somehow and a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Now what happened? It's going to be a long story. Like,
yeah. And then the teaser for the sequel, right? But this one doesn't have a teaser for the sequel. It just ends, and it's like, well, I don't give a shit if you like that or not, dude.
Yeah, it just ends, and you walk away, and you're like, well, that was sad. Everyone died. Zombies are bad. But that was a great movie.
Yeah.
Do either of you guys have any other topics of conversation or points about the movie that you want to make before we get into some just closing statements and we get into our recommendations? Matt, it looks like you want to say something.
I mean, just like in terms of revisiting the amount of gore, like knowing like the limitations of practical effects, special effects in terms of like gore, I'm also wondering, like, now I might be talking out my ass on this, but like knowing a little bit about, right, like censorship or at least profanity and excessive gore in films, especially at this time. It was, I believe was it the Hays Code is what it was like. They didn't have the Motion Picture Association, like it wasn't rated. It was it was self-governed.
Hays Code.
Was it? Because
Simon
Hays Code, was how long did the Hays Code go? Because I thought it was like right around this time is when it ended, but this movie was unrated.
Yeah, the Hays Code is over at this point. I don't know about the rating. I do agree with you. I think the movie was unrated. But I think you didn't need a rating to show at a lot of independent theaters.
Oh, okay.
During the day. And that would have been the market they were shooting for, like drive-in theaters, which weren't like, there's a common misconception that they were showing like super lurid pictures, but they probably didn't need a rating to get into a lot of those places. I would imagine. Gotcha. I'm also kind of doing some guesswork.
But I mean, my point being too, like, okay, if the Hays Code had been really the law of the land for such a long period of time before that, this is like one of the first a part of that first wave of what can we show, and like it's jarring. Like today, as I mentioned earlier, that first sight of that half-eaten face is so jarring, and then to see the blood, to just see the ghouls, and then that, you know, the feast upon the flesh, that it's just this moment for there's nothing more going on than the slurping and slopping of them chewing on human flesh. So like, I think in terms of really looking at that standpoint, and I'm probably jumping the gun here in terms of like our closing remarks of why this is essential, but I really feel like that aspect of it, of opening the envelope and then pushing it in terms of horror as a whole, not just the zombie genre, really setting the stage and pushing it forward for this is the amount of gore that helps move the story forward, and then also using the tricks of letting the viewer picture the horrors of like what you don't see also is just as bad.
Oh, totally. I think I would encourage listeners right now to go just look up like what other horror movies were coming out around the same time, and just think about, Matt, like what you're saying, the amount of gore, blood, whatever it may be, is being shown in other movies as opposed to this one. Like, this movie was going for it. Totally.
Yeah.
And I think a phrase that gets thrown around a lot when talking about older movies, especially when it comes to things like, you know, gore in the horror genre, is, you know, by today's standards, you know, like how gory is this by today's standards? And I think that this movie is still super gory by today's standards. I think a modern audience member watching it for the first time can view this movie and still be like, whoa, that's pretty crazy for me to be watching right now, which is just like an amazing thing to say about a movie that was made, 50 years ago?
And on a shoestring budget. Like that is the crazy thing, that they got that effect for pennies.
Yeah. And I think it's like, there's something about it that works, that like they were all creative people, but they weren't filmmakers, most of them, right? Like George Romero did shoot a lot of commercials and stuff for his company, but he was not really a filmmaker yet. And so they did certainly want to make money on it. I think it was like a passion project for a lot of people involved, which makes them want to push the envelope, right? Because they were like willing to take risks that other people couldn't. If you think about like movies coming out at this era, I mean, it's just the late 60s. So there are some movies that are like challenging norms, but this is not the same as like, I don't know, like Bonnie and Clyde or, you know, Easy Rider or something like that, right? Like this is a horror movie. It's like way grittier.
Oh,
and it's also not, because there were a lot of companies that were making super cheap movies for drive-in theaters and independent theaters, but they were often like kind of boring because they made them so cheaply and so quickly. And this was not made quickly. It was made cheaply, but it was made like over a period of time that I think enabled them to go balls to the fucking wall with a lot of what they did.
I love it. Dude, let's stay on after, and when we'll talk about late 60s postmodern film movement stuff.
Yeah, dude, for sure.
Dude. We'll talk about Night of the Living Dead. We'll talk about I guess Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate.
Yeah.
I feel like that was the context that this movie was given to us in that horror class. It was like, let's talk about postmodern horror now. We're in the 60s. And people are doing new things with art and stories.
People are making weird movies, right?
Yeah. They're using non-conventional shots, and the storytelling, it's not always as happy as it used to be back in the day.
That's the story of the 60s.
It's a reflection of our real lives.
Yeah. This was an amazing conversation. I had a ton of fun. I'm very grateful that you guys were able to to jump on. It's always a blast doing this with close friends, with good friends. So I'm happy that we were able to get together and make this happen. I feel like maybe because of time we can skip closing arguments, but I feel like both of you guys want to. So let's
argue what?
The movie's great. You should watch it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I do feel like that kind of has to be the closing argument is kind of like a unanimous, like, I think you're just missing something if you haven't seen this movie. You know, like I think if you like any type of horror movie in various subgenre or like any type of zombie related thing, like you have to watch it.
The gesture
Sorry,
thing.
wait. Simon, could you see it on your own screen?
What?
You
gave a thumbs up, and then there was like a little.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What the fuck?
Is it only happening for you?
That's okay. I'll try to do fewer hand motions next time I do.
I think it was if you like any kind of horror movie.
If you like any kind of horror movie, like I think the closing argument is just like you have to see this film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you like any type of horror movie, I mean, you can put this film in so many categories and so many subgenres, like indie film, different horror subgenres or whatever. There's like so many reasons to watch this movie that it's kind of like, I don't know, why haven't you watched it yet? That's what I would say. You know, why haven't you watched it yet?
Watch it. Go watch it.
Yeah, come on. It's fun. It's super, and it's kind of depressing, but also kind of fun at the same time.
And to answer that question as to why I haven't watched it yet, right? Like it.
Yeah.
After watching it, though, I'm like, okay, like it's that moment of clarity. Once I saw it, I'm like, oh, I get why this is often in that conversation of essential films, because at least from my perspective too, like having consumed so much other zombie media or whatever, and not being a horror guy, it was almost a reverse engineering process of, all right, this is supposed to be like the granddaddy of them all. Like I understood that. Like it was a part of the zeitgeist that I understood this is a benchmark film. And by watching it, I wanted to give it its due course of like, there are so many reasons why. Like, let's just ingest it and formulate that opinion, or like kind of see why people put that on that pedestal. So upon my first viewing, it and using some of that critical lens stuff of understanding the time period, understanding the budget, understanding really that, you know, as I'm watching it too, understanding they're writing the playbook for not only the zombie genre, for a lot of modern horror and beats, and as well as that ending, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it had that Twilight Zone-esque storytelling quality of it isn't a happy ending. It is a true tragedy, and like the entertainment, the story that you just witnessed it was all about the trial and tribulation of not just the outside force, but the inner turmoil, both of the individual and then the group fighting for their survival. I feel like that whole, everything that this film encompassed at the core of it really, really was artful and paved the way for a lot of very interesting stories to be told.
Hell yeah. This is, like you said, the granddaddy of them all. Without this movie, we don't get a lot of stuff, including a lot of stuff that we're going to recommend right now.
Yeah.
It's time for recommendations. Everyone's favorite part of the episode, my favorite part of every episode. Matt, Simon, you guys know the rules. Listener, if you're new, we'll explain them quickly. We're going to recommend 3 things that you should check out if you like Night of the Living Dead, which we really hope you do. One of those things has to be a movie. The other 2 things can be anything else in the world. It could be another movie. It could be TV shows. It could be an album, a band, a comic book. It could be food, a restaurant, anything in the world. We like to get really weird with it. Those are our only rules. We stick to 3 recommendations. None of those recommendations, if they are movies, can be movies that are in the canon. So we're going to try to avoid giving you other essential movies because we're going to talk about those at some point. But all that being said,
are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? this not why you were here?
This is what we're here for. We're here for recommendations. So we'll go one by one. We'll go Matt, Simon, Raph, and then we'll just loop around.
All right.
Keep going and give a brief explanation for why you're recommending each piece. So, Matt, kick us off.
All right. So this is my loophole in terms of it being related. I'm going to start off with my film. How it's related to Night of the Living Dead. It's a low-budget indie film that was also set and filmed in the state of Pennsylvania.
Nice.
Simon knows what it is, I think.
Do I? Oh, maybe. I don't know.
It is the 2003 classic Haggard, filmed, produced, written, starring Bam Margera and the rest of his crony crew from Viva La Bam and CKY and Jackass.
That's great.
It is most definitely not in the canon, nor do I think it will ever be discussed.
It's not in the canon, no. That's a great shout. I love that. In Westchester, Pennsylvania, it was filmed. I'm assuming.
Yep. Suburbs of Philadelphia, and there's a bunch of other like skateboarding cut scenes. It really is just this terribly written like drama / comedy. It's Bam Margera and his buddies making a movie about one of the guys like getting broken up, trying to get back with her, and then like all these weird cast of characters show up, and Don Vito, like everyone's problematic in it now. Like 20 years on, this is a problematic film, but it's just it's so quotable, and like it's such a deep cut that like if you meet someone who's seen Haggard and you mention one line from Haggard, they're like, what a weird movie, huh? And I'm like, yeah, it's great. I love it.
So it's a full-on narrative film with Bam Margera and all of his buddies. Did he make it? Was this made post Jackass fame, or was this made when they were like 13?
I feel like this was it was maybe concurrent with Jackass fame. I feel like it was just before Viva La Bam on MTV, like when he got his own show. But this was definitely at the era where he had gained a lot of traction. He was, I think, in his early 20s. But if he had done like a lot of other home movies too, like he shot on 8mm a lot. Like there were a lot of actual really good cinematography things that they did, and like it's just ridiculous. But they got like Tony Hawk to make a cameo, and like he's this like he plays this cop who's like there are scenes like Ryan Dunn is breaking bottles behind a Wawa to blow off some steam. And like I always ask, if I'm in Pennsylvania and I go to a Wawa, I text the 5 people I know who know this film. I said, I'm breaking bottles behind Wawa. Like, and they're like, Haggard. That's funny. But like Tony Hawk plays a cop and he arrests, Ryan Dunn for breaking these bottles. And he goes, you can't be breaking shit behind a convenience store. Like, what happened? He goes, well, my girlfriend's cheating on me. He goes, well, my wife is cheating on me with a man named Roger. Like, it's just like Tony Hawk say like this weird shit.
Yeah.
Like he's a real, I don't know. I'm going down the rabbit hole on this one.
No, that's amazing.
If you were into Bam Margera and you haven't seen Haggard, or like you were vaguely interested and you like low budget indie films with a little bit of skateboarding thrown in, pop that on. It's a 90-minute wild ride. There's some TNA, and
I have 2 questions. Well, one is more of a statement, but like it would have been really weird if this movie was made like post Jackass fame, and they just made a really weird, shitty indie movie on their own. And the second,
that doesn't help that there's a sequel, though. There's a sequel that they made that was post Jackass. It has nothing to like. Yeah.
I actually have a second statement and then a question. But my second statement is just R.I.P. Ryan Dunn. Very sad.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, R.I.P.
What a legend. And then my actual question, Simon, did this movie make it into your dissertation? And I don't think that we talked about it on air. For those who are wondering, Simon, can you explain what your dissertation is and why I'm asking if this movie makes an appearance?
Yeah. My dissertation is about skateboarding media, and there's a lot that goes into that, but generally speaking, like how does skateboarding media make itself like a subculture experience? And Haggard does not explicitly make it in, I don't think, but my third chapter is on mostly Bam Margera and Viva La Bam. So the CKY videos do make it heavily into the dissertation. Haggard might be in one footnote, but that's it.
Oh man, we are the three of us are definitely of an age where we were raised by Jackass, and
yeah, for sure.
It's it's definitely a weird generation to be a part of, knowing that so much of our just like understanding of internet and content and content creation and like also just like being a dude in the world is from Jackass.
Yeah. Talk about the canon, right? That is like the canon
of that era of the early 2000s.
Oh man, that's an amazing first pick. I think this is the most amount of time we've ever spent talking about a single recommendation, but it's so worth it. So thank you for that, Simon. How in the hell are you going to follow that up?
I have to follow up with three. I have to follow up with all three, or am I?
No, just
one.
We're going to do just one at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to start with. They're all somewhat deep cuts, but vaguely deeper than others. So, this is going to be another zombie movie. It's a Japanese zombie movie that came out pretty recently called One Cut of the Dead, which I don't think many people have talked about. People are talking a lot about Japanese and Korean horror films right now. So a lot of people are talking about like Train to Busan, right? Which is an awesome movie. But, the Japanese have some cool zombie stuff too. And One Cut of the Dead is also a very scrappy independent movie with some awesome stuff in it. And I really don't want to say like anything about it because I think watching it blind is a really good idea and not knowing anything. But there is at least one extremely long take in this movie, for real. So it's really good. That's all I'm going to say.
That sounds awesome. I'm into Japanese stuff and I kind of like zombie movies. So I'm definitely going to check it out. It looks like Matt is maybe writing it down. To watch it.
Well, obviously, I'm an uncultured person. If I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead, I'm taking notes of, all right, let's add this one. Oh, Citizen Kane? How do you spell that?
Surprisingly not in the canon.
Yeah.
Whatever. All right, Matt. So I'm going to do something similar to what you did. Well, Simon, you took the conventional connection point to give us a deep cut of a movie. I'm going to take a not so conventional connection point to give a really conventional movie recommendation.
Okay.
So my first pick, I'm going to go with Night of the Living Dead is one of the great movies that takes place over the course of one day, or I guess in this case, one night. So I was thinking, what are some of my favorite movies that take place over the course of one single day? And only one that I could really think of was 1995 Ice Cube, Chris Tucker, Friday.
Oh, I like
that. That's awesome. That's an awesome thing.
I like that.
But takes place in one day. You got people in a house and they're being chased by things, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
You know?
I like that.
That's, yeah.
And that's not in the canon?
It's not in the canon, no.
I feel like
it's in the if we were doing a canon of just like stoner movies, then maybe.
Yeah.
All time.
But that's a different canon. That's a different like sub canon.
Yeah.
Please do like a 420 episode where that is
just
that is what you do.
All-time stoner.
Yeah, it's just like all half baked, chicken chong, idle hands to all that shit.
And you're eating cosmic brownies. Smoking out of an apple pipe.
I hope Idle Hands is on one of your guys' list. But Matt, what's your next pick?
So my next pick, I'm going to go the unconventional route again. Again, going with a loophole.
Mm-hmm.
All three aren't like this. I promise. I did a legitimate one that is more towards the horror genre. But my loophole in this, I recommend the Auntie Donna sketch comedy troupe. They're from Australia. They're big on YouTube. They have a Netflix series. It's a short series. It's like maybe 6 or 7 episodes. They're all like 20 minutes each. Absurdist humor, like very Monty Python, whitest kids you know type vibe. And I'm very excited. They're doing an international tour, so I'm very excited to see them for the first time in Toronto coming up next month. The reason why it's related is because they had a cameo, a small bit part in the new Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves film as the corpses that were reanimated. So they had a role as living dead in the Dungeons and Dragons film. So this is just my opportunity to tell the world, to shout at the mountaintop that is Screen Age Wasteland. Please check out Auntie Donna. They're on YouTube. They're phenomenal. They're just great.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that pick. Okay. We love absurdist comedy. So
yeah,
check them. I might check them out. That sounds pretty rad. That's awesome. And I love how you tied it back.
I swear, I feel like the first 2 ones I'm like, it kind of counts.
Again, we like to get really weird with it. All right. If that's your way of connecting it, that's your way of connecting it. And we love that. Right.
I wanted to give this podcast its reverence, and by playing by the rules. That's all I wanted to do.
You're playing by the rule. As long as you don't try to give 4 picks, you're good in my book. That's it. That's the only, except last week, Bob, who writes for Screen Age Wasteland, we both gave 4 picks in our recommendation, but that was just like a one-off thing that we did with each other.
Wow, cheating.
Yeah. But other than that, besides that one agreement that Bob and I had, we can't do it. All that being said, Simon, what is your second pick?
All right, I've been trying. I have a really good third pick, and I've been trying to decide what my second pick should be. So I'm going to pick this film, Maniac, which is another sort of scrappy indie sort of exploitation film from the 1980s that takes place in New York City, and it's a guy who mostly kills prostitutes. It's like kind of the bulk of the movie. The connection is that it's some of the best work, some of the best gore and special effects from special effects artist Tom Savini, who did not work on Night of the Living Dead, but started working with Romero on Dawn of the Dead and so on. And in the 90s, is the person who remade Night of the Living Dead and directed that. So that's the connection. And that's an interesting movie, but it's not my pick. Not my pick for the canon. Maniac is the pick.
The remake of Night of the Living Dead is not your pick, but Maniac is the pick.
Maniac is the pick.
That sounds like you don't see a lot of horror movies in New York City.
Yeah, and you it's the 1980s because they kind of, yeah.
Or no, I think that's Chicago.
Candyman Chicago. Yeah.
But then there's the Friday the 13th one, which like doesn't make any sense. Like,
the new Scream movie was in New York, I think.
Yeah, kind of. That was fun though. But if you watch Maniac, you have to watch the 1981 because they did remake it like 10 or so years ago with Elijah Wood, and that one not so much Elijah Wood as the killer.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of sold on that one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both fun.
So, yeah, we love Elijah Wood. What? Come on. Yeah, we're gonna watch the Elijah Wood version.
Pop that on.
Yeah, that even a question.
I watch that one before I watch. Yeah, which order should I do?
You should watch them simultaneously.
Just do the SpongeBob meme. The SpongeBob meme where my eyes are just cross-eyed. I like that.
That's the way to consume art these days.
No, it's NFTs, man.
Content. Oh, dude, love NFTs. So for my second pick, I'm going to go with a zombie movie that is pretty whack, but also a movie that I like really adore for some reason, from a filmmaker who I understand to be, I'll say not problematic, but a filmmaker who is controversial, but who I still appreciate what it is that this person does despite me realizing that they are not making amazing films. But for some reason, I really dig Zack Snyder, and I really dug Army of the Dead. It has
I like
wild
that movie
kills.
too. That movie was so fun.
It's about nothing, but is also about everything because Zack Snyder is Zack Snyder, and he really leans into his sensibilities. And if you hate his sensibilities, you'll hate that movie. But if you're like, yeah, I appreciate what Zack Snyder does, then you'll dig that movie. I really like Army of the Dead. So that's
a great choice. I feel that movie is a fun and kind of weird zombie movie.
Yeah, he's doing a weird
sure.
thing with like what zombies can be. He's just like he's having fun with it. You know, why not?
Yeah, which is also how I feel about his Dawn of the Dead. Like I feel like he had fun with his Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, and
remake.
People love his Dawn of the Dead remake.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
He's just vibing. Let the guy vibe.
Let the guy make fun movies, even if he kind of sucks sometimes.
Just let the Snyder man snide.
Let Snyder man snide, man. Release the Snyder cut. I'm here for the Snyder cut. I don't care. I said it. Whatever. I like all the Snyder cuts. I like Batman v Superman. I don't care. I like it. I like the Ultimate Edition. Matt,
he's an auteur, man. You gotta respect. He's a peacock. You gotta let him fly sometimes.
Zack Snyder is a modern day Michael Bay, and if you can't get on board with that, then you're just missing out.
That's true.
You're doing a disservice to yourself, frankly. Nut up or shut up. I don't know how that applies. I've had a lot of support tonight. This is my first time drinking on this podcast.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Matt, what's your final pick?
Shit, man, this is like my actual serious pick. This is like my solid recommendation.
Get them in reverse order, huh?
I know. Well, yeah. Because I feel like you guys were gonna bring the heat, and like you obviously have. Like those sound awesome. So I highly recommend the it's a limited series. I believe it was aired on AMC, and it was The Terror, and it's based on the book. It's a fictionalization or reimagining of what went wrong with the Franklin expedition. Basically, like 1800s, trying to find the Northwest Passage through the Canadian archipelago. And The Terror, I had his name. It had the guy that was in Mad Men, the British guy.
Not John Hamm.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Jared.
The guy who's in Chernobyl.
Yes, yeah. That guy. Anyway.
That guy.
Okay. Just cut
we
around
all
this,
know
please.
that guy.
I know, it's like Jared Evans or something. Okay.
That guy.
So,
yeah.
That guy. So, I recommend The Terror, limited series that was on AMC. How it kind of relates is the Franklin expedition historically, they ultimately believe that it ended in cannibalism.
Nice.
And like the crewmates kind of left to their own demise. A lot of interesting stuff, but The Terror itself is a reimagining of like there was this mystic outside like terror that actually like plagued them and like feasted on them. But they also resorted to cannibalism after trying to survive in the Arctic. So yeah, but it reminds me of Night of the Living Dead because there are like these tense moments of like the characters kind of infighting and like trying to take leadership and do what's best for the group and like how to survive this onslaught of not only, you know, the frigid Arctic and trying to survive with their ship stuck in ice, but they're also dealing with this mysterious mystical beast of sorts. So yeah, nice. Definitely recommend.
That sounds
The
rad.
Terror. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Definitely a good watch.
This like totally flew under my radar. That sounds sweet.
Yeah.
That sounds
really
super
good.
sweet. And it has that guy.
Yeah. And that guy. Yeah.
That guy is
what is the cost of lies? That guy from Chernobyl.
I never finished Chernobyl. I didn't really like it that much. Simon, what's your final pick?
All right. All right. So I gave you a zombie movie,
and then that Chernobyl take.
Yeah.
You said no
We'll
hot
come back
takes.
to that. We'll come back to it.
Craig
after.
Mazin is an auteur.
All right, we'll come back to it after. So I gave you a zombie movie, and then I gave you like another like sort of gory exploitation film. So my next thing is not a movie, and it's not a horror or a zombie thing, but it is a TV show worked on by George Romero. So after Night of the Living Dead, he was like trying to make the money. He was still working in advertising, and he got the money to work on this television sports documentary series called The Winners. So it's a bunch of sort of 50-minute episodes. And kind of like with zombies, where he's more interested in human drama at some point. And The Winners, George Romero is like not really that interested in sports. He's like kind of more interested in the athletes and like what they have to say. It's very hard to watch this because most of it is completely lost. But there's one full episode of The Winners that you can find on YouTube or anywhere. And it's called Juice on the Loose. And it is the O.J. Simpson The Winners episode directed by George Romero. And so it was in the 70s, so it's like sort of pre some of O.J.'s more memorable media moments. But it's really, really interesting. Like a lot of like different like crazy conversations about sports and race and capitalism is really engaging. The only way that this episode is available to the public is that somehow someone got a copy of it and it was released as an Easter egg on a movie, on a softcore pornographic movie called The Blair Witch Project, which is just a porno parody of the Blair Witch Project. And that's also how this movie is. Yeah, also in the game. And so that's how you can watch Juice on the Loose on YouTube. Anytime you want. Directed by George Romero.
But when you watch it on YouTube, the softcore porn parts are cut out?
Not part of it. I think you have to purchase that separately and reconstruct that viewing experience if you're interested.
Okay.
So it's an Easter egg on that. Yeah. Like if I buy that DVD, I can find that
I think
Easter
if you
egg.
buy the DVDs on that, but I think that DVD is like long out of print. It's like a horrible like B picture.
I was just like I was worried that if I wanted to watch this OJ documentary, I would have to sit through 20 minutes of like awkward softcore porn.
No, it's a full feature, so it's more like an hour and a half.
Oh, and then I get to watch the OJ doc.
And then about an hour of OJ, yeah, but pretty good.
Soft porn and OJ.
That's a wild pick.
Yeah.
Which
I had to go out there with that one.
Which kind of ties into my last pick in a really weird way. But I remember when we were studying abroad, some of our classmates and us, we all bought a nudie magazine in Paris, and it came with a DVD, and we thought that it was going to be just like boobies that we were going to be watching.
Like the Blair Witch Project. Probably.
Yeah. like maybe some softcore porn, but mostly just like boobies. And we popped in that DVD, and it was like some of the most hardcore pornography I've ever seen. And it was such an uncomfortable viewing experience. That's not my recommendation. How is
he going to tie this? Did George Romero direct that?
But for my final pick, I did kind of want to do something that was Pittsburgh related, because Night of the Living Dead is one of the great Pittsburgh movies. And there are only a few other great Pittsburgh movies. There's some other good Pittsburgh content. All that's to say is I'm not recommending something Pittsburgh related, but I am recommending something else that I think that we all watched together in our flat in London. And I feel like this viewing experience was like a really special one to me. It sort of like represented everything that was great about that summer that we spent abroad, and you know, all the friends that we made there and all that good stuff, in a movie that I still think very fondly of. But I remember we all watched Shaun of the Dead together there, and it was great. Like we were in London, we're watching this movie, this English movie, this great Simon Pegg movie, and I still freaking adore that movie. And if you're going like comedy zombie flick, I think that's still the go-to. So I think it makes sense to recommend it here. That movie kicks ass.
It's such a good like zombie film in its own right, without the comedy aspects of it. Like the actual storyline of what they all go through, and then like the twist ending is great. I love how that all kind of resolved. But yeah, dude, yeah, I loved, and like the fact of it was the first time after seeing Cornetto, I'm like, oh man, I really want to go down to a bodega and get like a Cornetto right now.
Yeah.
Like that actually looks
so
really
great.
tasty right now.
It was so much more enjoyable than watching hardcore pornography as a group.
Yeah.
With like girls that we had met like a month before.
Yeah.
Weird stuff.
We thought it was going to be like a little bit weird, but it really did. It, you know, like Night of the Living Dead, it really from the get-go is kind of like, I'm going to fuck with you.
Yeah,
what
it
is.
was like we're going for it. We're really, really going for it, whether you like it or not. So
Yeah.
that's not.
If you want a little more of a relaxed viewing experience, you can do Shaun of the Dead. That's a little more our tempo.
Yeah,
maybe.
if you're planning a movie night with your pals, go with Shaun of the Dead. Don't go with hardcore French pornography.
Yeah.
Simon, Matt, this was so much fun. An absolutely great conversation. An absolute pleasure to have you guys on. Before we say any final goodbyes, let's just quickly run through our recommendations one more time. 1, 2, 3, same order. Matt, go for it.
All right, number 1, Haggard as my film. Number 2, Anti-Donna, Australian sketch comedy trio. And number 3, The Terror, the limited series that was originally on AMC.
And then for me, so I had One Cut of the Dead, Japanese zombie horror film, pretty recent. Maniac, 1980 exploitation New York film directed by Bill Lustig. And then Juice on the Loose, George Romero directed episode of The Winners, which you can find on YouTube, not connected to any softcore pornography DVD.
Amazing. I've got Ice Cube and Chris Tucker in Friday. I've got Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead, and I've got the great OG Simon Pegg, Edgar Wright, Nicholas, I'm forgetting his last name, flick collaboration, Shaun of the Dead. That's, dude, we did it. That was nice. This was amazing. If I don't know if you guys have any parting words, any final goodbyes, any words of wisdom that you want to leave with folks before we get out of here. But yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure.
Dude, thanks for having us on. This was a blast. I loved it.
I think if you listen to this, you can tell how much of a blast we had. You then have to go watch Night of the Living Dead if you've never seen it, because we had so much fun after watching it. So.
Yeah, so you have to watch it. We've talked about the movie for a longer period of time than like the actual runtime of the movie. So
yeah, that's true.
That should tell you something.
Yeah,
we've had a good time. Dudes, I've got my DVD right here. Nice Criterion.
Nice.
Is that the Criterion one? Because I have the same exact DVD.
Really? Nice.
Yeah, not fitting right here. It's in the living room, but yeah.
I got it like 2 months before they announced the 4K re-release.
That's what I have.
You have the 4K
re-release.
Yeah, it does look crispy as hell though. It looks great.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I watched on Amazon Prime. I have here. Let me pull up my Prime so I can feel a part of this.
Pull up your Prime account. Share it with
It's
everyone.
I'm 31 and I watched Night of the Living Dead on. I'm 31. I watched Night of the Living Dead using my poor mother's Amazon Prime account because it was
for
free.
a movie that's in the public
I didn't
domain.
know that it was on the public domain.